Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for coming along to this, which is the last in our series of EH seminars this term and the last of our patristic seminars. And today we have, as you all know, a very special treat because Sebastian Moll, who just graduated yesterday with his MTH, has written us a play which we're going to perform or do a semi-stage reading of. Meet Marcion. So we have the credits to begin with. Marcion is being played by Steve Martz, Sebastian's companion on last year's MTH. His disciple Apelles is being played by Marty Lunt. Tertullian is being played by Dr. Paul Parvis. Anicetus, the Bishop of Rome, is appropriately being played by Dr. Michael Fuller. And Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, is being played by Dr. John Armas. Sorry, I don't get how you pronounce it. Armas, okay. So Sebastian, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, well, one of my professors back in Germany always used to say, the worst thing for a theologian to say is, I don't believe it. But as playwright, I may say so. I really still can't really believe this, to see this play of mine, and my dissertation actually, as it was, being performed now, seeing it performed, this play which began as a complete weird idea this year in March or April. Some of you in this room were even, I think, with me when I timidly presented it back then to my supervisors in our class, and now seeing it performed by this league of extraordinary gentlemen, seeing it performed in front of an audience larger than I ever dreamt of. And without further delay, I think we should. That is to say, no, wait. I think I should introduce you to the play properly. Oh, for a muse of fire, that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene.
Stop! There's nonsense!
You spoiled my entrance!
And about time too, this is supposed to be a serious enterprise.
Ernst ist das Leben, heiter die Kunst.
What?
Schiller said so. It means life is serious, art is joyful.
I'm a theologian, I know German.
Well, maybe you understand the words, but you certainly don't understand the message. This is a piece of art. We're trying to paint a portrait of Marcion.
Indeed we are, and I'm here to ensure its theological and historical accuracy.
And I'm here to make sure it will be more than just another boring lecture.
Oh, there you are. I always said in the beginning this project was rubbish.
Wonderful attitude.
Come on, the whole thing is ahistorical from start to finish. You know perfectly well that Tertullian never could have met Marcion. Tertullian was born shortly after Marcion died.
Well, you know, Montesquieu was born more than 150 years after Machiavelli had died, and yet the great Maurice Joly let them meet in his Dialogue aux Enfers, not as a falsification of history, but in order to compare their views.
Oh, well, French philosophers, what do they know? We British stick to historical facts.
L'essentiel est invisible pour les yeux.
Will you stop that?
Well, if you prefer someone of your own kind, the great Anselm of Canterbury himself stated that those matters which are studied in a style of question and answer are more intelligible and therefore more pleasing to many minds, especially to those who are slower to apprehend.
Well, that's true, but on the other hand, he wrote a dialogue with his disciple Bosso. He didn't write one with Augustine or somebody else who'd lived years before.
Are these few years between Marcion and Tertullian really such an obstacle?
A few years? Do you realize how much happened in the last 50 years of the 2nd century?
Look, the play is called Meet Marcion, and therefore it will focus on Marcion. It is set in his time, in the middle of the 2nd century. And we will just have to shift Tertullian's birth about 50 years into the past.
So he'll be in his 40s, and Marcion will be near death.
Well, I guess we should make him a little younger too. You know why?
Why? That's what I was about to say.
Well, you know why we should make him a little younger? Because I don't want to make the discussion look like between father and son. Although we would have a nice finale then with Marcion saying to Tertullian, "I
But Marcion practiced celibacy, you know that.
And after the performance, the whole audience will know. Isn't that what your business is all about, teaching people these things?
Ah, but teaching demands absolute precision.
Oh yes, precision most sublime. My friend, the spirit of an earlier time. To us, it is a seven-seated mystery. And what you learned gentlemen would call its spirit is its image. That is all, reflected in your own mind's history.
But you still haven't told me how you're going to make Tertullian, with all his contextual views of a man at the turn of the 2nd and 3rd century, into a mid-2nd century man.
I believe I have a solution for that.
Oh, yes?
Well, you see, there are certain ideas which would certainly be anachronistic, and using them in the play would distort the historic situation we are trying to portray. Let's say Tertullian's idea of the church, for instance, which was far more developed in his time than it was in the middle of the 2nd century.
Well, let's hope they're no Catholic for the audience.
Well, on the other hand, you see, there are certain ideas which may not be as problematic as they seem at first. The rule of faith, for instance.
What are you talking about? You know perfectly well the first reference to the rule of faith is in Irenaeus.
Well, the first sure reference maybe, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it could not have existed 30 years earlier.
Well, I suppose so.
Therefore, our handling of Tertullian's work shall be, unless we can prove with certainty that his ideas would be anachronistic in the 2nd century, we can keep what he said. Can you live with that?
Barely. But what about Tertullian's personal situation? Will he have already put together his whole argument against Marcion?
Well, of course not. That would be boring. I don't want to make the discussion sound like, let's talk about this now, let's talk about that now. I want every discussion being born out of a particular situation, not just pieces of discourse put together. This is a real play, not just Platonic dialogue, and therefore he will not know much about Marcion when he meets him, only some rumors.
So, but what about the sources? How are you going to put this together?
Well, don't worry. The whole play will be based on the sources, both primary and secondary. Our best source, of course, being Tertullian's own work, Adversus Marcione.
But there's nothing that survives of Marcion's own work.
Yeah, but we can construct it from what his adversaries said about, or rather against him.
All right, well, Tertullian at least will be put together from his work.
Well, let's say for the most part. Then, you see, Tertullian does not provide us with much information about Marcion's life, and I want a first scene to introduce the audience to who this Marcion actually is.
All right, so as long as it goes on to the theology then. So the second scene will look at the most essential point, and then we'll go on and develop the later points.
See, we can work together if we try.
All right, I suppose this is going to be all right.
I look forward to this most fruitful cooperation.
But I'm warning you, no monkey business.
Admit me, chorus, to this history, who prologue-like your humble patience pray, gently to hear, kindly to judge, our play.